Good afternoon, everyone. I came all the way here from Alpha Centauri on the Greyhound. I want some enthusiasm. This afternoon, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the information and the potentiality of the possibilities of what could happen this year and what we need to do in order to get prepared for it. I'm going to take a little serpentine type path instead of telling a straight story, but we'll get there. This whole education is dedicated to my great-grandmother, Lucinda Wallace, who for 10 years came to see me and taught me everything she knew about gardening, which is also part of the reason why I'm here, because several of the things that she told me I then repeated in school, including doing my science project on the effect of growing in accordance with the moon, and I got a 0 because they said it was not scientific. So trying to see if my great-grandmother was right or wrong, I went out looking for scientific validation and found a lot more than I expected. Okay. The first part of, just briefly, I want to talk about how I became familiar with the phenomenon known as 2012. How many people have heard about 2012? Raise your hands. No? I mean, I'm referring to the fact that you turn on TV and weather people and politicians and comedians are all making fun about December the 21st, 2012, when it'll be the end of the world. Again. Okay. And this is based, of course, on the predictions that were made on a regular basis by the Mayans in what is referred to as the Mayan calendar. How I became familiar with this is that in 1987, during the harmonic convergence, I had the occasion to work with a woman who did the hosting for most of the New Age participants, and I got to sit down and speak for 2 hours with Jose Arguelles. He is the person who did the actual translation of the Mayan calendar, and at that time, he told me about many of the predictions that are in the Mayan writings. So the first thing I want to say is that when people talk about, or certain people refer to December 21st, 2012, it's not that they made one prediction and that it's the end of the world. They made many predictions which have all come true up until this time. And that's why that's why everyone's looking at this. Okay, I know this is getting boring, but I'm getting to the fun part soon. What is repeated by the media over and over is that the Mayan calendar indicates that it is going to be the end of the world. And they say it's going to be the end of the world because of a thing called the precession. The precession is the phenomenon of how our North Pole points out into space. Is that right? Okay. And according to these writings, it takes about 25,900 years to go around and get back to the same place that it was initially. It makes that circular path because the Earth is not exactly equal and it wobbles slightly, otherwise known as nutation. It just so happens that we will be facing the edge of one of the arms of the galaxy at this time. And I'll get to why that's significant after a while. But we will be pointing, our planet will be pointing at the same spot that it was quite a few thousand years ago. While talking with Jose, he happened to mention that the writing said it will be the end of time. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the Mayans believed that there were 4 great ages or epochs, and that we were coming to the end of the 4th epoch or cycle. It was not the end of the world. It was the end of time. And so I asked him, what exactly does that mean? And he said, right now, we vibrate under the understanding that time is money. But as we get closer to December 2012, individuals and then greater groups of people will understand that time is art. That whatever we love to do, no matter what it is, because everybody thinks it's going to be a bunch of hippies running around, just if you're into politics, if you're into garbage cleaning, whatever it is that you're inclined to do, the thing that you could do all day long and not be exhausted, that's what we need to look for and actualize. So I said to him, well, what does it say we need to do to prepare for this? And he said, the Mayans said the 2 most important exercises we need to do in order to prepare is singing and dancing. So that doesn't sound so gloomy. Okay, where do I start here? Oh. In order for us to figure out what our inner urges are, that thing that we're looking for that we really can do over and over and over without getting tired. One of the things we need is fresh food and fresh water. Of course, when I started, there was very little bottled water. The idea of paying for water seemed sort of absurd. But the more and more time that went by, the more the rivers were degraded, the ocean was polluted, and we depended more and more on not the stuff at the tap, but buying stuff from the store. So I'm just going to start off very briefly by describing a few things that we can do to purify and energize our water. Of course, I've gotten into a lot of trouble because I use the scientific term for this energization, which is called structuring. And if you go on the internet, there's a whole bunch of debate as to whether structuring is real or not. I base my opinion on the fact that every vitamin that's made in this country is made with structured water. And many of the products that we buy would not be able to stay together without structured water. That's just my opinion. However, I'm just going to give you the science of structuring, and you can do with it what you like, or may. Oh yes, how many people have ever heard the term structured water? Okay. And what does that mean? What does it mean? What does structured water mean?
I just saw a book on it.
Mm-hmm.
I flipped through it maybe 5-6 years ago. And it was really interesting, but I didn't buy it. So I don't know, I couldn't say. I just encountered that book. I don't remember who it was by.
Leah?
I learned about it, other than chatting with you, but what I think maybe led me to feeling like I could conceptualize it was looking at Emoto's work, Masaru Emoto, and the ice crystals and how water so readily responds to sound and how to capture that. And that's pretty fascinating.
The person she refers to, Dr. Emoto, is a scientist who was able to demonstrate that water takes on the characteristics of the consciousness or the energies that surround it. And depending on the speed and the vibration that it's traveling at, it will either become more organized or less organized. And that's what we mean by structuring. Before I proceed, I just want to give you one more principle, and that is that most matter goes through a cycle of activity and rest. I'm going to repeat that. That most matter goes through a cycle of activity, rest, activity, rest. One of the things that I found most fascinating is that regular science knows that steel is weakest between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. But they don't like to say that because that's when lots of people are driving over the bridge to go home. It's nothing to worry about, but molecularly it is not as coherent as other times of the day. So everything, but I only say that to say that everything goes through a process of activity and passivity. I was going to say one thing, and now there's 3 things. Okay, camera's running. These things hanging above your heads, they were first introduced to me, and they were referred to as the Platonic solids. That's because Plato talked about them 2,500 years ago and their significance. I don't have all of the 5 Platonic solids here, but I do have the dodecahedron, the hexahedron, the icosahedron.
Yeah, those back.
Oh yeah, and the octahedron. We know that Plato wasn't the first person to come up with this system because we found cave drawings and actual 3-dimensional carvings of the Platonic solids that are at least 2,000 years before he mentioned it. We also know that Pythagoras learned about it and brought it back from Egypt to Greece. Great. There was a gentleman several years ago who started talking about the flower of life. And he went around the world giving lectures on the significance, the metaphysical principles of these things. While I use a lot of metaphysics in my work, I am a scientist. And therefore, I wanted to know the practical application of these things. So lo and behold, imagine my surprise when I first started studying structuring and I found out that the 5 basic shapes that water takes on are these same 5 Platonic solids.
What are they again?
You don't have the tetrahedron.
I don't have the tetrahedron. Right.
But you have 2 of them.
Yeah. And very simply put or illustrated, when you see the basic Platonic solid, that's when it's in its passive state. And when it changes over or gets structured, the molecules break apart and form a smaller series of molecules, which is now everybody knows as micromolecules. And so it changes from one version of itself to another. My favorite, the one that I illustrated today, is it changes from this into that, and then back again. We know this because the Air Force many years ago dropped a camera out of a plane that took 9,000 pictures a minute. And when they looked at the pictures, they saw that water changes into 130 shapes per minute. One of the secrets to water and the health of water is its movement. In other words, if water sits for a long period of time, it is not as energized and does not function as well. So basically, I'm just going to show you a couple of different ways to structure your water so you can energize the stuff that you use. Oh, yes.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So it changes to 130 shapes from talking about like evaporation and up into the atmosphere. Was it in temperature based, or the progression of water molecules?
It changes into a few more shapes falling than it does rising.
Okay, but that's essentially what the camera was gauging, was the at different atmospheric pressures and temperatures the water was.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right. There are several different methods one can use for structuring water. Quartz crystals, light or color, sound, supercooling, pyramids. Since magnetism is one of the most basic things on the planet, I'm going to start off with magnets. The poles of the magnet operate in opposite ways. The North Pole shrinks or concentrates. The South Pole expands. So therefore, if you've got a cut, you'd want to put the North Pole facing onto the cut. People quite often ask me if it makes a difference if the strength of the magnet makes a difference. The only real difference it makes is how deeply the injury is. If it's on the surface, then you can use the magnet right on the surface. If you have interior damage, then you're going to want to use a series of magnets that you create a field that goes all the way to the damaged area. That's why the neodymium or the very strong magnets are used, because they go all the way through the body. In other words, what I'm saying is the neodymium magnets are very small and very expensive, but if you have just a common cut, you can use a kitchen magnet. Strength is not really relevant. It's having it in proximity to the injury.
What is it? It concentrates what does it do essentially?
What does the magnetic field do?
Yeah.
The magnetic field tells the cells whether to expand or contract. So it doesn't tell them, but it sets up a field of. When I first heard this information, I was, to put it mildly, more than skeptical. I'd never heard of magnets, magnet healing, or anything like that in any of the work that I was familiar with. But lo and behold, like most things in my life, I was in for a shock. Because as soon as I opened up a textbook and I read about Mesmer, the man who I was familiar with as far as hypnotism. It turns out that before he was hypnotizing people, he was using magnetism to heal them. He got into trouble, of course, because it was during the Victorian era and he had to put the magnet up the woman's dress. Oh, no. As I researched a little bit further, I found out that the Chinese had been magnetizing their water for 5,000 years, since 3000 BC. And so therefore I was like, what are you talking about, Willis? But it turned out to be remarkably simple. It turned out to be remarkably simple technology. All you do, you take your magnets, you know these are the opposite poles, right? So if you're looking for the South Pole, darn it, you just find where they oppose. Now I left my magnet, I brought it all the way from West Virginia and I left it on the floor. But if you're going to do any kind of magnet healing or magnet energizing your water, you want to go to a scientific shop or send somewhere that has a differentiated magnet. It may cost $4 or $5, but it's well worth it because that way you can tell every magnet after that. You just label it. The universal code for magnetism is that the North Pole is blue and the South Pole is red. Now, it may seem like I'm making a big deal about this, but the reason I'm making a big deal about this is that life is an endless series of ironies. So, of course, I learned my initial scientific understanding by reading about the Chinese 3000 BC magnetizing stuff. So now, if you go to the store and you get the magnets and it says made in China, their stuff is reversed. So if the red side, which is supposed to be the South Pole, is actually the North Pole. So if you try this experiment and you use a magnet from China without checking it, it may not work. Oh, one more factoid I need to impart to you, and that is North Pole charged water and South Pole charged water energize different parts of the body. I'm making a very, very big deal about this because back east, people are paying thousands of dollars for these water purifying systems, and they're charging their water to be highly alkalized. That has to do with diet and this and that and all this other stuff. However, most of the waters that I've tested around the world have not been highly alkalized. They've been 7, they've been neutral, 7.4. That's neither here nor there. What I'm trying to tell you is that North Pole charged water activates all the organs in the endocrine system. The South Pole, or positive ionized water, activates the bloodstream and the DNA. So that's why I consider to have the balance important. Another way of saying the same thing that I've just said is that when you have South Pole charged water, the water is more viscous. It's flowing, it's not flowing as quickly. North Pole charged water will increase or will lower the viscosity, which means it's flowing quicker. For drinking water, I recommend that you just take the magnet, north and south, and place it around the spout where the water's coming out.
So what does the magnetizing do to the water? What's the benefit?
That would be a 3-hour class.
Okay.
The end result is that it takes more impurities and toxins out of your system. It allows things to flow more freely, and it purifies more of your system.
I guess like,
I can answer that. When you introduce structured water into your body, it's going to take the elements, the nutrients that you have, and deliver it to your cells more quickly. As a matter of fact, if I had some structured water here and we drank it, we would see that instead of the water going into the lower intestine before it entered into the system, that some of it would be going right through the stomach into the bloodstream. Now, what's fascinating about that is that legally they've determined that water is only that substance that goes through the lower intestine. So structured water is not even categorized as water. Yes?
Have you run across Ray Kurzweil's writings about this in Singularity is Near, or
No.
Fantastic Voyage? He talks about water more alkaline.
Mhm.
He recommends buying a certain product that'll do that for you. But he says very important. He's a life extensionist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Singularity is Near, or the movie is just phenomenal.
Okay.
Unbelievable.
Okay, I'm gonna address your question, but I'm gonna skip over us. Okay, forget humans for a moment. Okay. Remember, I said that this lecture is dedicated to my grandma Cindy, and that's because she taught me about agriculture, and that's where I really was able to show the difference between structured water and non-structured water. The plants don't have an agenda. People don't have to say it's anecdotal. I can measure the nutrient content. I can measure how quickly the water is going into the plant, how quickly it's growing, like that. So if you want to try it with your plants, and this is how I learned. North Pole magnetism will atrophy seeds. South Pole magnets will greatly increase the germination rate of the seeds, the speed at which it grows, the time in which it matures, and the amount of fruits or vegetables that it generates. And that's one exposure of the magnets to the seeds. I'm going to repeat that. You just find out where the south pole of each of your magnet is. You make a field so that the seeds are in between that field. Sometimes you can use 2 magnets if you just have a few seeds, or I just make a whole ring of south pole magnets if I have a bunch of seeds. Now, I couldn't wait for 4 months to test out the food because I learned about this principle in November. So I was like, what am I going to do? I got to try this. So I realized I could use sprouts. And I was able to demonstrate repeatedly that the south pole exposure to the seeds would make the sprouts grow quicker, and they would drink more water than the control group of the North Pole.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't expose the other side of the magnet to it at all?
No.
You just have like one half of the magnet.
That's right.
And the seeds surround it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have seeds that aren't germinating, is it possible that you can kind of bring them back to life with a South Pole facing magnet, or if they're atrophied, is it like kind of a done deal?
One of my favorite questions. Okay. The seeds are breathing. They're taking in 2 units of oxygen and letting off 3 units of carbon dioxide. What we call bringing back to life, they're just sleeping.
Okay.
You cannot bring life from death. You can't. However, what you're actually asking, which is the question I was asked, is like, Mom, these are the packet that we had from last year. How come only 1/4 of them germinated as from last year? If they're still breathing, you can activate them and they will, more of them will germinate.
Okay.
Yes. But you can't bring life from death. It's just that simple. Now, in terms of watering the plants, we also want to water the plants with South Pole Energizer. So, like I said, that's just a simple matter of taking the same pole. Now, of course, it's going to resist, so you tape it on. And you don't want to expose the magnet to the actual water, because over time, it'll affect the iron, and therefore the magnet will get weaker. So you just want to put it a little bit back from the thing.
So are you using copper tubing? Is that essential?
This is just simulating the hose.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay.
The copper
Now,
doesn't have anything.
the significance is also that the different methods that I mentioned to you, they all have different times, different rates at which they last within the water. The magnet is the most effective immediately, but it wears off very quickly. So that's why you want to magnetize your plants when you're watering them. That's also why those people who have the device where you attach to your bottle and you fill one and you flip it over and the water goes down, you need to drink that water within an hour, because the magnetism is strong as you first do it, and it's also got the vortex in it, but the magnetism dissipates over time.
So they make
That-
magnetized tornado tubes?
Yes.
and things?
Yes.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
I always loved those things when I was a kid.
Yeah, totally.
Interestingly enough, or nuttily enough, you're somewhere and you left your magnet at home, you don't know what to do, oh my goodness gracious. Well, you see, once again, I started studying the Great Pyramid, and like most people, I thought that the Egyptians just sort of lucked out when they came to those buildings, that everything else was very low tech, you know. I mean, they lived in the desert, you know, and they worshiped animal-headed gods and crazy stuff like that. So, you know, what could they know? But lo and behold, as I started to do my research, I came across this funny-looking picture from India. And the picture had something that looked sort of like this. And of course, it was all corroded, not corroded, but patinaed. So it was all, you know, the green, and then it turned black, and it was crushed on top of the black, you know. But what it said was, this funny-looking thing was used by the Hindustani people, that's what we call India then, for purifying their water. And I'm like, how? Well, lo and behold, this kind of technology, the less work you do, the better. And that is to say, you just let the water go in here and come out here. It's that simple. Now, of course, all of my friends said, you're bugging. So, of course, late last year, some scientists proved why this works. So it absolutely does work. So if you're somewhere and you don't have anything else, you can just get a copper tube. It's got to have 7 turns. But by the time it comes out the other end, it's more structured, and it actually breaks down much of the pollutants that's in the water. See, because people always say, how does it do that? Well, it's very simple. The water molecules are like this. As they break apart and become smaller, they let go of those pollutants. Because the water is moving so quickly, it breaks it down to the micron size where it can come out of your body. A pollutant is a pollutant because of size. If it's small enough size, it will be broken down and come out of the body. Ta-da! Okay. This is also really, really handy if you don't have your magnet. You can place this on the end of your hose for watering your plants. This is also great for people who take showers. Just attach the pipe onto your shower head, take the shower head off, attach it to the pipe, put the shower head on this end, voila. Very, very basic and simple. As far as the quartz crystals are concerned, this works because of this principle, which I love. Dissociation. What is dissociation? Come on, take a wild guess, someone. I have no idea either. Dissociation is the effect of when you introduce quartz into water. Well, there's many things that dissociate, but in this case, when you introduce quartz into water, the quartz crystal, the base of it, where it grew from, rubber band? The bag with the rubber bands, did you give it back to me? When a quartz crystal grows, it has a base. This is what it grew. It grew off the matrix from the base. And then it also has a termination. When we measure this, and this was measured in the 1900s, that's how we know, the bottom has a negative charge, the point has a positive charge. When you place it into water, the atoms of the hydrogen and oxygen dissociate from each other. The oxygen, having a negative charge, will go to the positive end of the crystal. The hydrogen, having a positive charge, will be attracted to the negatively charged end of the crystal. In its so moving, it will move the water, and moving the water will help to give it more energy.
And is there an ideal length of time to let it all cycle in a typical glass of water, for example?
I have found that 6 hours is the maximum that you want to do it. Ideally, you want to, if you're going to use quartz, you want to charge it in the dark, so in a closet or in a refrigerator, and you also want to expose it to cold if possible. So refrigerator is a very good place to do that.
Oh, so that's why there was quartz in those rocks in the water filtration system I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other minerals? Aren't they responsive at all? Like, I feel like in Omaha water is so highly calcium, like there's just so much calcium
Mm-hmm.
that would that require like stepping it up or doing something more different to like.
North Pole charged water will break down the lime or the calcium deposits in your pipe.
Okay.
So if you charge your water with North Pole water and just stuck it up to the shower head, it would loosen up and take out a lot of that stuff. Yeah.
Do you have to purify your crystals in the moon and stuff like that?
You don't have to, but that's a good idea. Yeah.
What does that do? Do they say put your crystal in the new moon or the full moon or something?
Mm-hmm. Full moon.
Full moon?
Mm-hmm.
And do you know anything about what that does?
Okay. By definition, well, there's several definitions for defining a crystal, but one of them is that it has an internal orderly pattern. And we know, it's kind of nutty and fascinating, that whenever we put energy into the crystal, the second that we put energy in, it's already out the other end. So like it's almost like we can't even measure the time that it does. But since all the atoms are in the same position from each other and spinning in the same direction, depending on the charge of the energy we put in other words, to put it in layman's language, if we put in positive energy, if we put in negative energy, it will siphon off, or that is to say, because that energy is spinning in one direction, the atoms have to use energy, they have to use their own innate thing to make it go in the other direction. So some of that energy gets bounced off the side. Some of it comes out the top. Or to put it simply, there's no such thing as 100% negative energy. On the other hand, if we put positive energy through the crystal, it will amplify that up to 500%. So the crystal's doing some kind of work that it needs a recharge from time to time. And you can do that by having running water that you place it in, the full moon, under a pyramid.
It's charging the crystal.
Huh?
It's charging the crystal.
Yeah. Yeah. Or pyramids. Pyramids are also good for that same principle too. And or if you get a cluster of a crystal, you know, that they all grow in one piece, and you place the single piece on top of that cluster, that will also purify and charge the crystal. Burying it in sand will do that too. So will burning sage. Any of those methods will
Charge your crystal.
Yeah. It's up to you. Okay. That's dissociation. Oh, yes, this is where this comes in. Okay, now I said that the speed of the water is relative to its health. So, of course, we want to make sure that it's moving as quickly as possible. Help me. What I'm trying to say is that if you place the crystal into the water, bloop, it's going to move at a certain speed.
There's two ends there.
Yeah, okay. But I found this wonderful book and in it it said, well, you'll get the principle. If I take copper wire and I wrap it around the crystal, and I wrap it 7 times, it's going to speed up the rate at which the water is being dissociated. So the water is moving faster and faster. And the book said that I could wrap it as many times as possible. In other words, once you get past 7, the more times you wrap it, the faster the water will move. 7 and multiples of 7 seem to be the ideal. So 7, 14, 21, 28. However, if I get a crystal and I get 31 wrappings on it, I'm not going to unwind it back to 28. It's, you know, like that. So that's that principle. Now, one more thing that relates directly to this is our home environment. Okay? I've talked a little bit about drinking water. I've talked a little bit about just how to activate the seeds. I haven't even got to the soil yet and the air and all that. But inside the home, there's something that we need to look at, and that is ions. Ions are very, very basic to human life. They're not a mystery. They're not a New Age thing. The bottom line is any form of moving water above ground generates negative ions. I'm going to repeat that. Any form of moving water above ground generates negative ions. That's rivers, lakes, rain. Number 1 is waterfalls. The forest. Where's the water in the forest? 90% of all the water the tree takes in during the day comes off in transpiration. And the dew in the morning is also another example of moving water. That's why many monks get up before sunrise, because they're out there getting energized by the dew. Lack of moving water will generate positive ions. The desert, the full moon. When the sunlight hits the moon, it polarizes it, thus making it positively charged. One positive use of that is in terms of getting your clothes white. If you have white clothes and you want them to be whitest ever, just put them out during the full moon, when the full moon light is hitting it. That's from Greece, 2000 BC. Nothing new. Negative ions speed up the rate of digestion. They make our thinking clearer. They break down smoke, dust, and pollen. Positive ions attract smoke, dust, and pollen. They slow down our digestion. The ideal ratio that we find in nature is 70% negative ions to 30% positive ions. When we come into environments that have 90-degree corners, which is where most of us live and work, the ratio is 30% negative ions to 70% positive ions. Like that old commercial used to say, what's a mother to do? Well, mom just has to round off the corners. One of the reasons why we have such high positive ions in the home is because the television, computer, fluorescent light, and refrigerator are all generating that. Television is number one. Why is television number one? Because the ray goes 50 feet. I'm going to repeat that. The ray of the old TV boxes, not the flat ones, but the old TV boxes goes 50 feet. Yeah. That's the cathode ray tube. Okay? Negative ions will not penetrate matter. Positive ions go right through matter. So if your neighbor has a TV and it's less than 50 feet from you and it's coming right through the wall. This was measured by scientists in a lab where they had a 20-foot room with a 2-foot lead wall. They went back, lead wall, still got a reading. I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I'm just saying this is the reason why we need to address this issue.
Are the new TVs better? Nobody knows yet.
Some of them are. Most of them still generate the positive ion field, just not as far. We'll address what to do with it, but the house is number one. Before we even get to the appliances, the house is number one.
What about like Wi-Fi? Like Wi-Fi internet?
Yeah.
Like, is that creating a lot of positive ions in your environment?
Okay. The thing about physics is you can talk about a condition, or we can also talk about principle. And that is when you have two different frequencies, higher frequency rules over lower frequency. So that means if you're vibrating above the frequency of the Wi-Fi, then it's not going to harm you. That's one of the reasons why you're going to eat fresh food and be outside and do all that stuff, because your vibration, that stuff will not harm your cells. It'll still go in, but it won't harm you. That's the funny thing about nature. It's like, well, I'm living next to the tower. It's like, how are you living? Tower, you can't move the tower, so you better deal with your organism. In general, though, I would say that long term we're going to see some results of living in that kind of environment. Negative. Long term, though, it's going to take a while for it to have an effect that we can measure and see. That's just my opinion. We don't have enough time to know if it's safe. That's my answer to that. Once again, we live in a world where we can't avoid these things, so we might as well figure out what to do about it. Everywhere I go now, there's Wi-Fi, so let's deal with it. Anyway, rounding off the corner is relatively easy. Okay, we don't have to actually physically make it round. We just want to eliminate the three 90-degree corners. There's three 90-degree corners. There's this one, that one, and that one. So by just placing this up there at the top, the positive ions that exist in the room are going to come up, hit this point, and join with oxygen, which tends to reside at the points, join together, and it's no longer a positive ion. Where can we read about this? Buckminster Fuller, 1965, told us that all triangles generate oxygen and therefore is a healthy and healing environment. Now, my specialty is agriculture, and I started out by using pyramids for growing over food. To tell you the absolute truth, the geodesic dome is the best shape for growing food inside of, whether it has windows or not, meaning whether it's enclosed or open. That shape has so many triangles and it's generating so much oxygen, the plants naturally grow up and are healthy. However, making a geodesic dome is a lot more work than making a pyramid. One of the things we know is that they found the kamut, which is a grain. They found that in the Great Pyramid. It was over 2,000 years old. They planted it in the ground. Now you can buy boxes of it around the world. We know that the pyramid aids in keeping seeds fresh between the seasons. There are other things too, but the pyramid's very basic, very simple device. Just place them in there, wait till the next spring. In terms of the big gardens, we have a choice between making a really, really big pyramid like, let's say your garden is like this. And let's say that this is 60 feet and this is 100 feet. You'd have to be making a pretty darn big pyramid, because the pyramid always starts with a square, so it'd have to be at least 100 by 100. And that would mean it'd be 63 feet tall. Now, people ask me this question all the time. Like I said, you can put a pyramid over your small garden. They're like, well, what about the industrial gardens, Kellogg's and all? I'm like, we're trying to get away from that. That's not the answer. For reasons I could spend another 5 hours on, but that's not the point. This kind of physics has more than one answer, and that is, in this case, you're going to buy a bunch of pyramids from me, or if you're really, really smart, you're going to make a bunch yourself, little ones. And then you're just going to take a piece of copper wire and attach it to the top of the pyramid from here to here, and everywhere enclosed in there is resonating the pyramid energy.
So on pyramids, what's the difference between the three-sided pyramid and the four-sided pyramid? Or is that one a pyramid? Is the three-sided one a pyramid?
No, the pyramids I'm talking about is the four-sided one, four upper sides. The easiest way I can describe it to you is that the three-sided pyramid is a pushing out energy, whereas the four-sided pyramid is a more pulling in energy. Okay? How do we know that? Or an example, in other words, what examples do we have of that? Well, the best example we have of that is in the Temple of Isis in Egypt. If you go there today, there's a room, and for years and years, there was this sort of slab, and there were these copper tubes that were just sitting along the floor, and no one could figure out what it was, and they're like, oh, finally one architect went there, and he says, hey, this pole looks like it goes in that hole, and he put it in there, put the second, and suddenly there was a tetrahedron, and they realized that this was a birthing chamber, and that the energy of the tetrahedron helped the woman to push the baby out. So they have different energy flows, is the best way I can put it. Now, if we were talking to Plato, he'd say that this represents the fire element, because he described these shapes in terms of the 5 elements. So that's another way of looking at it. That this would be fire, and that would be earth. Yes. You're next. No, go ahead.
The ones that I was telling you about in Peru,
Mm-hmm.
some of them were cones,
Mm-hmm.
where they said they stored grain.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll ask that one later.
The conical shape is interesting because it has okay, let me back up here. The Western way of looking at this is describing it in terms of one element, like this is fire or this is pushing out. But when I look at it from the perspective of everything I've told you today, which is to say active and passive, passive and active, then I would also describe this as this is more pushing out than pulling in. There's always going to be some energy that's the complement to the majority energy. And I'm only saying that because in the case of the conical shape things, it's an equal distribution of energy going up and coming down. So that's a balancing energy, your cone shape.
Okay.
And that's also why the witches wore that on their head too. And the dunce cap. The dunce cap was not a punishment, it was a balancing of the energy. Yes?
Buckminster Fuller, his invention of the octet trust, uses the tetrahedron and the octahedron to make one of the strongest forms available.
Mm-hmm.
So he offsets these geometric shapes to work with each other to form a really strong. It's called the octet trust.
I'm glad you said that because I just have to go back to the corner for a minute, but I'm just remind me of that when I get done with that. Okay? Going around the house and putting these triangles up in all the corners in the house, because that's just like the tantrum thing when I tell people, you mean every corner? You only had to do it once. That is, so you don't have to do it the next week and the next week. But but that's converting the positive ions into negatives. You also want to generate the negatives, and you just do the same thing that you had with your quartz crystal. You take your copper wire, you wind it at least 7 times or multiple 7 times. You get a glass container, and it's on the copper wire, so you put it in so it's halfway down. That way you get the maximum flow of the dissociation going on. Now, it just so happens that a friend of mine bought me this book from California about Victor Schauberger, and that's a man who was an expert in he wasn't just a scientific expert. He loved the earth and all the natural forces, and he left us many examples of what we can do when we do really work in conjunction with nature. The point is that I read this book for 2 years. Like when I get to the end, I just start again the next day. I read it for 2 years. And then finally, it was like, the answer you're looking for is in this chapter. So I read the chapter, I copied it, I read it every day for another 2 years. And then boom, one day, it hit me. This thing right here is an electronic version of the grid that's around the Earth in our atmosphere. This is known as and I had that aha moment that I could take this and put it on my container. And instead of the ions going out 2 feet from the bottle, I could now make it go 16 feet out in the bottle.
What was this thing called?
It's called a biocondenser. That's not what it is, that's its function.
So
And just to give you a tiny window into it, what it is pockets of structured water that exists in our atmosphere that takes energy from outer space and converts it to electricity that sends it down to Earth. Yes, you're gonna say.
So what's it made out of? How do you?
Copper.
Okay. And how do you make one?
No, you use copper foil.
Do you have plans for this to people who make them?
After class.
Okay. I'll wait.
It's not hard to make. It just you just have to cut out a whole bunch of little copper pieces. See, that's why people pay me. That's literally why people pay me, because this is one of the things that you're sitting around cutting a half-inch thing all the way around the bottle. It's like, nah. The reason why this is significant is because when you buy a negative ionizer from the store, usually they only cover a 5 by 5 foot area, and not even this way, like just 5 feet this way. So this system is converting the positives into negatives, and the bottle is shooting them across your room in every room in your house. So you're getting a cross circulation of moisture, which is what you would have if we had the old apartments where you had the windows at each end and you could let the thing go through.
So
It's also true that screens produce positive ions. So even opening your window and you have a screen, you're still not getting it. But nature is great to us. You just take a bowl of water, put it next to the screen. As the ions pass through the screen, or as the moisture passes through the screen becomes positively ionized, the water's there to replace that molecule. Send it out. You gonna say?
Is that because the screens are little squares?
Well, the shape of it isn't as important as the material. The aluminum will strip atoms off of the water molecule, and in fact, aluminum siding is one of the least healthy materials for people to be living in. On the other hand, all these new age people I know are afraid of aluminum and plastic and all this other stuff. But if you leave the aluminum foil under the pyramid until you use it, it will not only neutralize the negative effect of the aluminum foil, but it will actually put the energy onto the food. So that is to say, if you were to come home and you bought something from somewhere, apple from somewhere, you don't know whether it's organic or not, you could take your aluminum foil, just wrap that apple for an hour, and it's going to purify it, as if it's a pyramid. This is a wonderful thing, okay? Because you could just take your aluminum foil with you when you're traveling or whatever, energize whatever you're doing.
Shiny side out or in?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Is this why there's that storm smell? Like in terms of the energy field around this planet, when you have electrical storms, there's there's that ozone smell, and there's, I mean, even on the, weather underground, like, you can find people talking about, like, the more negative ions or what have you in
Well-
the environment.
Well, you're bringing up the most relevant point, which is we have the most positive ions right before it rains.
Okay.
Right before it rains is when there's the most positive ions. And one of the reasons we know this is because it's illegal in Israel for doctors to operate right before it rains because they make more mistakes and the people take longer to recover. That's the effect that we know positive ions have. An excess of positive ions have. I'm trying to be very clear to let you know I'm not against positive ions. We need that as much as we need the negative ions. Whenever you have your copying machine, you see that white light flashing as it goes over. That's charging the paper with positive ions. And then the ink, which is negatively ionized, goes right onto the pattern. That's how it works.
Once it starts raining, then you're washing negative.
Then you're washing negative ions. That's correct.
Yeah, I always like going jogging or something when it's raining or like when there's lightning and stuff. And,
Mhm.
like, I just have this super abundance of energy. Like I feel like I can just like run and run and run and I don't get tired, like
Sure.
I normally would.
It's also true that the most energized water is rainwater. And once again, I want to be very specifically clear here. The rainwater has its maximum potential energy as it's falling to the air. So therefore, if it hits the ground and goes down the gutter, it's transferred most of that electrical potential. But if it's hitting you, or if it's hitting the plant, especially the plant's absorbing that electromagnetic energy that it's picked up.
That's actually something very easy to see for anybody that gardens. I've only had a few gardens in my life,
Mhm.
and I noticed it a couple of years ago. And this year, before all these rains came in, and I was watering. The plants weren't going anywhere. And then there's one storm, and they just absolutely, anybody can see that.
Mhm.
Rainwater is very different.
Also, in the same thing that I said before, that you want to charge or store your water in darkness. If you're collecting rainwater in your barrel, you want to have it so that there's a lid on top. You don't want light to get to it because it's going to take away some of that energy. Right now, you go to Home Depot. I don't know if you're at Home Depot, but you go to the garden center and they got these big plastic things. Okay, look, just like the Wi-Fi, it's here. Let's deal with it. Okay, if you got a plastic rain barrel, just put some quartz crystals in there. Dangle them in there. That'll take away some of the energy of the plastic. As far as if you're talking about positive storage units, wood and or ceramics, porcelain, because it's breathing. Water is breathing.
So ceramic rain catch would be ideal.
Well, wood or ceramic, yeah. And there's a whole science to the rain barrel, which I didn't even know about. I was like, rain barrel, oh, they just put a metal thing on it. No. There's some real science to that. Once again, we're an equal opportunity universe, and that is to say that if you get a plastic rain barrel, just get a pyramid and place your pyramid over the ring so that the rainbow is inside of it. Now, in this particular case, you may not have the space to build a pyramid that big that the rainbow will go completely in. So you can take it and place it so that some of it's inside the pyramid. It's still going to purify the plastic. It just takes 2 or more weeks. But if you don't do anything with that for 2 more weeks, you're going to convert that plastic. And once again, none of these things that I'm telling you, I'm not asking you to believe any of it, but what I'm saying is when I first started, I was afraid of all this stuff. I was afraid of aluminum. I was afraid of plastic. I was afraid of all these things. And at least the universe showed me things that I can try and compensate for those things. So that gives me hope. And plus, things like this, please. I'm going to take a little break, and then we're just going to talk about the cosmos for just a momentito. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. I started off our lecture by talking about the potential that 2012 has. And when I say potential, one of the things that I've encountered for all the years that I've been doing my thing is that people ask me, has this been scientifically tested? Has this been scientifically tested? Now, of course, when I say yes, that doesn't address anything. Well, when and how and where, and I'm like, okay, do you understand magnetism? Do you understand whatever? And they're like, no. What difference will that answer make? But I'm saying something different now that I'm actually in 2012. And what I see more and more is that for the last 25,900 years that we've been trying to get back to that point of origin that we started at, that there's been a bunch of developments, a bunch of civilizations that have lived with different consciousnesses. And that now all of us have access to the collective knowledge that has come down for the last 25,000 years. That is to say that in the last year there's been more discoveries, more books about scientific theories other than the ones that we have. They discovered pyramids in Russia, in Greece. Actually, there's one right off the coast of Cuba. And so while most people are asking for scientific proof, what I'm here to say is that we have access to the data, and through our science, that is to say, through whatever it is that we're working on, we can validate what we're doing. So it doesn't matter necessarily if other people believe in or accept a given science, because there's a lot of science that's out there that they claim that I don't accept. And especially when you have medicines for antidepressant, the side effects of which include diarrhea, headaches, and depression. So that doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't have to accept it. I can take my own science and my own values and see where that leads me. So in keeping with that, there are a few things that have come up recently that I want to want to bring to the table. Oh. Number one. This is called the wellness pyramid. This is a tetrahedron. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tetra means 4. 3 upward sides, 1 base. This has been measured to speed up the rate of healing by a factor of 10. Now, this does not heal the person. That's why it is not the healing pyramid. What it does is it activates and structures the water around whatever illness or disruption. And that water then raises the vibration of the diseased area until it comes back to its normal rate. This has been scientifically measured to speed up the rate of healing broken bones, organ damage, improved eyesight, even bringing light to blind folks. Not full sight, but people who are blind from birth can actually perceive light using this device. I did not invent this. This was something that came through me. And by through me, I mean literally I was sitting there and suddenly my hand started moving and out popped the first one. Since no one here is going through any diseases right now, and I'm saying that as an affirmation, after I finish the lecture, I want each of you to try and pass it over your hand, your arm, or your body to see if you can feel it, and also use it for your chakra area. Really good for going through all 7 chakras. Of course, you don't go this quickly. And there will be a sense of alignment afterward. Now, of course, the number one use for the pyramid around the world, is for sharpening razor blades. That's one of the reasons why I kept going, because I'm like, it can't, are you kidding me? Of all the things it does, that's what people are using it for? But in fact, this is how it was introduced to the world consciousness, that people were able to use their razor blades or their cutting knives, whatever, for a lot longer between recharges as it is. Now, the books don't say this, but just studying science, many of the old books talk about the fact that you have to align the pyramid to be in alignment with magnetic north. So you have to get a compass and line it up and do all this kind of stuff. Due to the fact that the earth is going through her changes right now, I would recommend that instead of that alignment, that you pay attention to the magnetic or electromagnetic fields in your house. So in other words, you wouldn't put this in front of your television set, you wouldn't put it on top of your refrigerator unless it had a base. On the other hand, if you're around a lot of electronics, you just put a magnet at each of the 5 corners, and that'll keep the electromagnetic fields in the house from interfering with it. And what I'm trying to say is, if you're sharpening knives or razor blades or anything, you want to face the blades so that they're facing west. Wherever west is that way? Yeah, so you face it so that the blades are facing west. Now, it'll work in any direction, but it's more effective if the blades are going west, facing west. Why is that? Because the jet stream is moving energy from the west to the east. So as it's hitting, of course, that energy is 300 miles up, but it's still affecting our energy down here. And as those molecules hit this, it's stripping the water off the edge of the blade. That's how it works. Man got a patent. In order to sell them, that's how we know. That's how we know that it works. Food. Of course, you're going to grow your food, or you're going to get your food from the grocery store. Most of our food is, in fact, breathing. It's just breathing at a slower and slower pace. It's converting its simple sugars into more complex carbohydrates. One of the fascinating things that I read was that everything in a can converts simple sugars into complex carbohydrates. Everything in a can. That means every can that I get goes inside of my pyramid until I use it. Now, that's the science side. The human side was, we put some salmon inside, forgot about it. 6 months later, we found the can, opened it up, the skin was like it was fresh. It did not taste like salmon from a can. So the longer you leave it in there, the more it's going to work on it. As far as most foods are concerned, people are paranoid. They're like, oh, I'm going to leave my food out. Well, you need to leave a lot of fruits and vegetables out from the refrigerator anyway. But it's not going to spoil. And in fact, if you grow potatoes, you will find that placing your potatoes inside of a pyramid, the roots will grow like a foot. That's what you want, because you're going to get the most potatoes from that. Promotes life. Onions will grow. Stuff will grow inside. Of course, I don't want you to have it that long, but there's no real mystery, because people are like, what's the minimum amount of time? Well, the minimum amount of time is an hour. If you're worried about something spoiling, then just place it in there for an hour, then place it in the refrigerator, whatever you're going to do. And then when you're going to cook it that day, just put it back underneath it until you're ready to cook it. Very basic, very simple.
Does it dehydrate?
It completely dehydrates.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that because one of the biggest uses of pyramids is as meditation chambers. People who go inside of them, usually they're open pyramids. They're big enough for people to get in and you meditate in them. It feels so good to most people that after a while they say, I want one over my bed.
Mm-hmm.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Pyramid works by driving water. Remember, it drives the water off the edge of the blade?
Yeah.
It's going to drive more water out of our system. So before we start wanting to sleep underneath an entire pyramid structure, you might want to get a small pyramid that you hang up that radiates down to the floor. Because the energy is going to radiate down to the floor for living things. So if you have a plant, the plant doesn't have to be inside the pyramid for it to feel the effect. It's stronger if the pyramid is turning. If the pyramid is turning, the field is just going to be that much stronger over your bed. After a month or two, and also drinking more water, you then make the pyramid over your bed because it's going to drive more water out of you. And if there are any health issues or emotional issues, they're going to come up. It's going to bring that stuff to the surface as well. These are reasons why not everybody's ready to have these kinds of things, and a lot of people bugged out. Also, people, particularly the men, want me to make a pyramid out of wood or copper. And I tell them, you want to start off with string or even rubber bands. They're like, oh man, what's that going to do? So, of course, the first time they had to get up to go to the bathroom, they run up and hit the head on the copper one. They're like, oh man, I should have got a rubber band one. So, there are practical, it's a slight lifestyle change is what I'm saying. It's not just as simple as go out and get a pyramid and do whatever.
Is that why there was bread at the ancient Egyptian exhibit that was preserved because it was, that I was telling you about, the one in the UK, that they had all these loaves of bread that looked like bread. That because it was under a pyramid and so it just dehydrated it and it could sustain, or?
Well, in a few cases, but in most cases, the Egyptians were able to hermetically seal their temples and their tombs in such a way that no air got out and nothing got in. And this is a mystery to us because Egypt for thousands of years had lots and lots of earthquakes. And so they really were able to seal something so tightly. When Howard Carter opened the seal and poked his head into King Tut's stash, the first thing he said was, I could smell the cedars from Lebanon. And the cedar furniture that was in there still had the cedar smell after. And I was like, I went to my auntie's house and she used to have to change those blocks every year. Yo, something's up. He also, by the way, when he climbed in there, he found that King Tut had a silk scarf. The silk was from China, and he had a stainless steel razor blade, which he shaved that day. And I'm like, wait a minute, stainless steel? I thought 20th century was stainless steel, you know, and this razor blade was still sharp. So that's how well they were able to seal up their stuff, hermetically sealed, like Hermes. Okay. This is for the record. Everything is an exchange of energy. One of the signs of life is taking in and letting off of energy. Our star, the sun, takes in gases from space and releases light, heat, sound, magnetism, and the solar winds, cosmic rays, infrared, blah, blah, blah. The earth takes in sunlight, dust, radio, infrared, ultraviolet, and lets off oxygen, carbon dioxide, and radio waves. We eat food, this includes sunlight. We take in air and release carbon dioxide and water. Plants taking water, minerals, sunlight, and carbon dioxide and let off oxygen. Just like magnets, electricity has polarity, a positive and negative charge. We see this on batteries where the top is marked positive and the bottom negative. Everything is an exchange of energy. But one of the things that the Mayans told us is that time is ending. So what that means on a practical level is each one of us is going to go through a completion cycle. By a completion cycle, I mean before we go to the other side of 2012 and start up again, we need to balance and get ourselves whole. Thus, for someone like me who's very scientific and whatever, but couldn't sell, a bagel in a famine, I need to get that side of myself balanced. Okay? And how we're going to do that is that we're going to accelerate the astrological process. What the hell does that mean? It means that whatever sign that we're born in, now for thousands of years we could have been born in the sign of Leo and we have all the characteristics of Leo, that's it. But now, crunch time. In order for us to be the full potential beings that we are, we're going to have to start at Leo and go through all the other signs and pick out all the things that we need before we come back to be the full Leo or Virgo or Cancer or whatever it is that we need to be. So I say that because even though this sounds strange, in the next 6 months, we might find ourselves doing things or acting in ways that are unfamiliar or even ways that we're not used to. We might be attracting people into our lives that are different than the ones that we're used to or the ones that we thought it was going to be like. So just be prepared for uncertainty. Now, how can you be prepared for uncertainty? Let it go. Let go of the anticipations that we have. Let go of, well, it used to be like that. Okay? Because people keep telling me they want to go back. They want to go back. And all I can think about was when I was 10 years old and I was in Virginia and I had to sit in the balcony in the movie theater because only the white people could sit downstairs. I don't want to go back. There's all kinds of things I don't want to go back for. The phone. There's fun, but we're here now. Okay? So, in keeping with that, there's going to be a few startling things coming down the pike. Who can tell me the shape of our star, otherwise known as the sun? Survey says. Now, come on, jump on in. You got to say it's a sphere, right? Sure. Okay, so what shape is Terra, our planet?
Dodecahedron.
It's a dodecahedron. The only reason I'm saying this is because people would say that our planet is also a sphere. But it's not. It's flat at the top and the bottom. And Bucky actually showed us, because he made the map where you could fold it out and reassemble it. But the Russians in the 50s did a survey, and they found that the electromagnetic, or specifically the magnetic field of the Earth, is an icosahedron. They measured it. You can see pictures of it, and pictures of the and it fits right inside of here. So, like, you can see the magnetic field superimposed underneath the dodecahedral shape.
Those shapes are dualities.
Yes, yes. Now, in terms of your point that you made before, ultimately, what I'm doing with these shapes, I mean, I'm sitting in for making the best water possible. And I didn't even get to sound. We know that classical music is great for structuring water. I've also found specifically 60 beats per minute is the ideal thing for making the brain most active and making the water structured. But I've also found that Indian music, gospel music, and Yaman reggae music also very good for charging up the water, man. Now they're not 60 beats per minute, but there's something about the integrity and just the rhythm of it that helps. I, however, am trying to expose these shapes to people because these represent the most efficient ways of going from one stage of energy to another. You cannot find a more efficient way of building up or tearing down than starting off with the tetrahedron, going to the octahedron, the cube, the iso, and then the dodeca. So by having these in our consciousnesses, by having them in our houses, and like I said, a lot of my friends have them on that thing, but I want them to hang so that as they spin, we can start to understand the efficiency of movement. Right now, we have many, many devices that can be improved in their efficiency. I mean, the light bulb is 5%. Like that's, to me, that's like when they say, we have the forest fire 10% contained. That means it's 90% out of control, and we can do better. As far as your TV set, computer, fluorescent light, once again, the quartz crystal comes to our aid because you can just place it on the extension cord, wrap it with tape, copper wire, doesn't matter. It's going to cut out 90% of the positive ions. Now, the positive ions are still there, and you can actually tell the difference because you turn on your TV set, you'll feel it go past, you'll feel the little hairs come on your hand. Turn it off, put the crystal on, it'll go out, but then it'll come back and it'll reside about 6 inches from the set. So that's one very inexpensive way to deal with that. Even though some people say it doesn't matter, the crystal work forever, I like to take mine off of these devices and charge them up every 6 months or so, just because they're working, and the average American watches 7 hours of TV a day, so that's, even if they're not watching it, it's on, so the crystal's doing some kind of work. I was talking about space. Can anyone guess where we find the octahedron in or on our planet? The octahedron is that shape sitting on the table back there.
Pyramids
Around
in
our
Mexico.
bodies.
What are you saying?
Pyramids in Mexico.
No. I mean, that's a good guess, but no. The pyramid, the octahedron is in the middle of there. Once again, I would love to say that I metaphysically channeled that information, but that came from the Navy.
Came from where?
The Navy.
The Navy.
What makes up that shape in the middle of the earth?
The iron nickel core.
Is that shape?
Yeah. Surprise! I said something controversial. Only I didn't, the Navy did.
How does the Navy know?
The Navy knows because they had to do they did the research for the communication of their submarines. decades ago. That's how they found out.
Low frequency sonar.
Yeah. This is old news. All I'm trying to show you is that a lot of this information, which has been hidden or militarily suppressed or what they call industrial secrets, all of this stuff is going to come to the surface. So whatever it is that we need, whatever scientific principles we need to go forth, whatever metaphysical principles we need, all of it will be available to us. That way, when time stops, we're completely whole. But guess what? I'm going to say something metaphysical now. When that chasm opens on December 21st, we're going to be, or our planet is going to be in resonance with the sun, because both of our magnetic poles are going to be facing directly into the heart of Sagittarius A, which is the black hole in the middle of our galaxy. And here's the metaphysical part. To the degree that we're whole, that's the degree that our instruction for our new assignment will resonate from the middle of Sagittarius A back to us. I'm going to leave or end by saying, all my life, I have watched movies, TV shows, plays about the ancient Egyptians. And they quite often want to show them bickering and arguing and having subterfuge and, all this stuff that they did against each other to get power. And when it comes to their religious or spiritual belief systems, they always emphasize the afterlife, the underworld, in the next world, taking your slaves with you, with your breads and your cask of beer and your old bread, all this stuff. Yes, on the other side. The point I'm trying to make is, all my life, I've heard Egypt, and they've described it in terms of a death cult. The whole emphasis of building a pyramid was so that you have the supreme resting place. Only problem with that is nobody has ever been found in the pyramids. Even when they've opened ones, they're completely sealed, and they find what they call the sarcophagus, and it's sealed, and they open up, nothing. I say that's a problem only in the sense that because I've had to study pyramids for so long, and particularly the Egyptian pyramids, I also had to read about their spiritual belief systems. And the primary objective that each Egyptian had was in activating the idea that each of us has a spiritual name. That spiritual name was born before we were. It resonates somewhere out there, and it has all the information we need to live a completely full and balanced life. And that they spent their time in their temples and in their meditations trying to hear their spiritual name. When it comes to what we think is possible, we go to the movies and we spend $15 to see Iron Man or Superman or Spider-Man. If we spend a little bit of time trying to hear our spiritual name, we might find that the things that we think are supernatural is just the next level of our understanding. Everything is an exchange of energy. Remember? Everything's an exchange of energy. When the birds are singing, of course they're communicating with each other, but what are they also activating? The birds are activating the root systems of the plants and the trees. I'm just trying to say everything's an exchange of energy, even when we don't see it or don't understand it. Now, why do the birds start singing in the first place? It's their natural tendency, but they sing a little bit more enthusiastically once we hit March the 21st, the spring equinox. Why is that? That's because as the day gets longer, there's a slight bit more light that goes into their eye, and their genitals start to grow. Their genitals start to grow, they start singing, the plants start to grow. We see the robin go on the ground and peck. There's the worm. But why is the robin pecking on the ground?
Is he drawing the worm up?
The worm knows that while it can go through the ground and munch on all this earthly material in order to get nutrients, it knows that when it rains, the nutrients rise to the surface, and all it has to do is swim around it and get all the food it needs. So it waits to hear the raindrops. So the robin says, everything is an exchange of energy. I'm only saying this because the more we become familiar with the ways of nature, the more we'll see how integrated everything is, and we'll start to appreciate our own part in it. These things that I've told you about have nothing to do with being healthy or whatever. I mean, yes, it's about being energized, but it's to figure out how we integrate and best serve this entire function. So I want to thank you. I want to thank my great-grandmother for leading me on this adventure. I definitely want to let you know there are way more shapes than this. I only say that because eventually there'll be a shape for everyone. I mean, I can't make, I looked in my science book and they said that the dodecahedron is structured into 30,028 shapes. So I was like, okay, I'm not making all of those. But I do try to make the ones that are universally applicable to the most people. And in keeping with that, after all these years, and we're talking about all this music and harmony and the cosmos and all this, and everyone's like, the Negro bugging. Somebody put this together. This is all the stuff that I have studied. So my conclusion is there's more than one bugging person, but at least we have a record of it. But those who want to check out, like it says, the 4 classical liberal arts of number, geometry, music, and cosmology. These are the teachings of Pythagoras, and this is a great place for people to begin or go further in their understanding. So I thank you all, and have a great trip, and thank you all for welcoming me to Omaha.